Christmas Eve in Chicago, a tiny, cold apartment, and a young woman crying alone, recording a voice message meant for her best friend, but sending it by mistake to the most powerful and intimidating man she'd ever met, her billionaire boss. What happened next would change everything. A desperate audio message, a luxury sedan waiting outside, a mansion where another soul was just as lonely as she was, and a love that would survive betrayal, lies, and a conspiracy designed to destroy them both. If this story touches you, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments, where are you listening from right now? Your support is what keeps stories like this alive. Snow was falling slowly over Chicago that Christmas Eve, covering the streets with a heavy, white silence. Outside, lights blinked in building windows. Families laughed around full tables. Children ran around in new pajamas. But on the fourth floor of an old building on the west side, inside an apartment smaller than 300 square feet, Jordan Wells was completely alone. She was 22 years old, with brown hair falling loose over tired shoulders and eyes that no longer sparkled the way they used to. Sitting on the cold wooden floor with her back against the peeling wall, Jordan stared at the makeshift coffee table made from wooden crates. On it sat a foil tray with a portion of frozen roasted chicken she'd reheated in the microwave, some lukewarm instant mashed potatoes, and a bottle of flat soda. This was her Christmas dinner, alone. The apartment smelled of mold and the old electric heater hissing in the corner. The fogged window let in only a dim glow from the streetlights outside. Jordan pulled the thin blanket over her shoulders and felt the tight knot in her throat rising with force. She didn't want to cry. Not again. But tonight's loneliness was different. It was the kind of loneliness that hurt from the inside, that made her chest ache as if something was slowly crushing her heart. She thought of Maple Creek, the small town in rural Oklahoma where she'd grown up. She thought of her family's wooden house, the smell of apple pie coming from the oven, her mother humming while setting the table, her father laughing loudly with uncles on the porch. She thought of the Christmas lights her younger sister always insisted on hanging crooked on the tree. All of that seemed so far away now, so impossible. Jordan had come to Chicago full of dreams. She wanted to grow, wanted to prove to herself that she could live on her own, that she could build something bigger. But 6 months later, all she had was a job as a receptionist at Bennett Global, a salary that barely covered rent and bills, and the constant feeling that no one really saw her. She was invisible. At the company's reception desk, Jordan greeted executives who walked past her without making eye contact. She answered phone calls, organized schedules, smiled politely while feeling the weight of accumulated exhaustion on her shoulders. No one asked how she was doing. No one noticed when she left early because she'd skipped lunch to save money. No one knew that tonight she would be completely alone. Jordan picked up her phone. The screen glowed dimly in the apartment's darkness. She opened WhatsApp and scrolled through her contacts until she found Hannah Brooks's name, her best friend since childhood. Hannah still lived in Maple Creek, worked at the town library, and always knew what to say when Jordan felt lost. But Jordan couldn't type. The words wouldn't come. She needed more than text. She needed someone to hear the pain in her voice. So she pressed the voice message button and started talking. At first, her voice came out shaky, low, almost embarrassed, but gradually the words began pouring out like a flood. Jordan talked about being alone at Christmas, about the cold dinner on the foil tray, about how invisible she felt in that enormous city. She talked about the fear of having no one, about the homesickness that hurt like an open wound. She talked about the loneliness that swallowed her whole, about how tired she was of pretending everything was fine. And then Jordan started crying. It wasn't a contained cry. It was a deep, desperate sob, full of months of accumulated silence. Hot tears streamed down her face as she held the trembling phone in her hand. She could barely speak between sobs, but she kept recording, because somehow saying all of that out loud made the pain seem just a little more bearable. When she finally stopped recording, the audio was almost 4 minutes long. Jordan wiped her face with the back of her hand, took a deep breath, and with her vision still blurred by tears, pressed send. The audio was sent. Jordan let the phone fall into her lap and closed her eyes, feeling exhaustion weigh like lead. She didn't want to think anymore, didn't want to feel anymore. She just wanted that night to end. But then the phone vibrated. Jordan opened her eyes slowly and picked up the device. A new message. She expected to see Hannah's name on the screen, maybe a loving response, a voice message back full of comforting words. But the name that appeared made her heart stop. Lucas Bennett. Jordan felt her blood freeze in her veins. No, 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 no. She opened the conversation with trembling hands and saw it there, right at the top, the audio she'd just recorded, 4 minutes long, sent to Lucas Bennett, her boss, the CEO of Bennett Global, the most intimidating, most distant, most powerful man she knew. She had sent the crying, desperate audio to him. Jordan felt the world spin. She ran her hand over her face, trying to think, trying to understand how this had happened. The contacts. She must have clicked wrong, must have selected his name instead of Hannah's. And now he had heard everything. Everything. She typed quickly, her fingers stumbling on the keys. "Mr. Bennett, I'm so sorry. That message wasn't meant for you. Please just ignore it. I'm really sorry." Sent, and waited. The seconds felt like hours. Jordan held the phone so tightly her fingers turned white. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to vanish. She wanted the earth to open up and swallow her whole. Then the phone vibrated again, a message from Lucas Bennett. Jordan opened it with her heart beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. The message was short, dry, direct. "Where are you? Send me your address. Come here, now." Jordan read the words once, twice, 3 times, trying to understand. He was telling her to go where? To his house, in the middle of Christmas night. Why? To fire her in person, to humiliate her even more. She didn't know, but she also knew she had no choice. With still trembling hands, Jordan typed the apartment address and sent it. Then she dropped the phone on the floor, hugged her knees, and stayed there, waiting for what would come next. Jordan didn't know how much time had passed, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15. She remained sitting on the floor, hugging her own knees, the thin blanket fallen around her shoulders. The apartment was silent, except for the low hiss of the heater and the muffled sound of laughter coming from the apartment next door, where someone was still celebrating Christmas. She stared at the phone on the floor as if it were a bomb about to explode. "Come here, now." Lucas Bennett's words echoed in her mind, cold and direct. Jordan tried to understand what that meant. Was he angry, offended? Was he going to fire her? Or worse, was he going to humiliate her for having heard her crying desperately, exposing all her fragility? Jordan ran her hands over her face, trying to calm down, but the fear was there, heavy and real, squeezing her chest. She thought about not going. She thought about pretending she hadn't seen the message, about turning off her phone and simply disappearing. But she knew that wouldn't solve anything. Lucas Bennett was the kind of man who, if he wanted to find her, would find her. So Jordan stood up. Her knees were shaking. She walked to the small cracked mirror hanging on the wall next to the door and looked at her own reflection. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying so much. Her face, pale, her hair, messy. She looked exactly like what she was, a broken woman, exhausted, lost. Jordan wet her face in the tiny bathroom sink, trying to hide the signs of crying. She ran her fingers through her hair, pulling it back into a loose ponytail. She put on the only heavy coat she had, a grey overcoat already worn at the edges, and pulled on her old brown leather boots. She didn't know where she was going. Lucas hadn't given any address, but soon her phone vibrated again. Another message. "A car is waiting for you downstairs." Jordan felt a chill run up her spine. A car, waiting for her. Downstairs. She descended the building's creaky stairs slowly, her heart beating faster with each step. When she pushed open the front door and stepped out onto the snow-covered street, the freezing air hit her face like a slap, and there, parked right in front of the building, was a gleaming black sedan. It was the kind of car Jordan only saw in movies. Dark windows, impeccable bodywork, wheels that shined even under the snow. The driver, a man in a dark suit with rigid posture, stood beside the back door. When he saw Jordan, he nodded and opened the door. Jordan hesitated. She looked back at the old, dark building where she lived. Then she looked at the luxury car in front of her. Two worlds, two completely different universes. And she was about to cross that line. With her legs still shaking, Jordan got into the car. The interior was warm, silent, and smelled of new leather. The seats were soft, the interior lights gentle. Jordan sank into the back seat, feeling completely out of place. The driver closed the door, returned to the front seat, and without saying a word, began to drive. Jordan looked out the window as the car glided through Chicago's streets. Christmas lights blinked on the poles. Store windows gleamed with red and gold decorations. Couples walked hand in hand on the snow-covered sidewalk. Families entered lit-up restaurants. The world outside seemed so distant. She didn't know where she was going. But gradually, she began to realize they were moving away from the west side, where her apartment was. The car headed north toward the city's wealthier neighborhoods. 15 minutes later, the car entered Lakeview Heights. Jordan knew that name. Everyone in Chicago knew it. It was where the rich lived. Modern mansions, wide tree-lined streets, private security, tall gates. It was a place where someone like her would never enter. But there she was. The car stopped in front of a tall, imposing black iron gate. The driver typed a code into the panel beside it, and the gate opened slowly, revealing a paved driveway lined with snow-covered trees and discreet lights embedded in the ground. At the end of the driveway stood a mansion. Jordan held her breath. The house was modern, imposing yet elegant. Glass walls, dark concrete and natural wood, straight minimalist lines, warm lights glowed from inside, revealing a spacious and sophisticated space. Everything there screamed power, money and control. The car stopped in front of the main entrance. The driver got out, opened the door for Jordan and extended his hand. She accepted, still dazed, and stepped out of the car, feeling the crunchy snow beneath her feet. The front door opened, and there he was, Lucas Bennett. Jordan had seen him dozens of times at the office, always in an impeccable suit, always serious, always distant. He was the kind of man you noticed as soon as he entered a room. Tall, broad shoulders, dark hair combed back, strong jaw, blue eyes that seemed to see through people. He was 34 years old, but carried an authority that made him seem older. But that night, he was different. Lucas wore a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves, no tie, with the top 2 buttons open, dark pants and bare feet. His hair was slightly messy, as if he'd run his hands through it several times. And there was something in his face that Jordan had never seen before. Exhaustion. It wasn't physical exhaustion. It was something deeper, a weight in his eyes, a tense line in his mouth. He looked human. Lucas took a step outside and stopped at the top of the small staircase leading to the door. He looked at Jordan, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Then he spoke. His voice was low, firm, but not cold. "Come in." Jordan climbed the steps slowly, feeling her knees weaken. She passed by him and entered the house, and the door closed behind her with a soft sound. The warmth inside enveloped her immediately. The floor was dark, polished wood. The tall walls exposed concrete with natural wood details. A floating staircase rose to the second floor, and to the right, Jordan saw an enormous living room with white sofas, a lit fireplace, and huge glass windows overlooking a snow-covered garden. But what caught her attention most was the table. In the center of the dining room sat a long table of solid wood, and on it, a complete dinner. White porcelain plates, silver cutlery, crystal glasses, platters with roasted turkey, gratin potatoes, roasted vegetables, golden bread still warm. There was even dessert already served on a side tray. Everything perfect, everything untouched. Jordan looked at Lucas, confused. He stood beside the table, hands in his pockets, his face unreadable. "I ordered it from a restaurant," he said, his voice calm. "I wasn't planning on eating alone." Jordan felt a tightness in her chest. She didn't know what to say. She didn't understand why she was there. She didn't understand why he had sent for her. She didn't understand anything. Lucas took a few steps until he was closer to her. He looked into her eyes, and for the first time, Jordan saw something that surprised her. Kindness. "Sit," he said, pointing to the table. "You shouldn't be alone tonight. Neither should I." And in that moment, Jordan understood. He was alone, too. Jordan stood there in the middle of that enormous, sophisticated room, not knowing what to do. She looked at the abundant table, at the untouched dishes, at the man in front of her who had somehow stopped being just her intimidating boss and had become something else. Someone vulnerable. Someone real. Lucas took a few steps toward the table and pulled out a chair. "Please," he said in a tone that was more invitation than command. Jordan hesitated. Part of her still expected this to be some kind of test, some cruel trap. But another part, the tired, lonely part, just wanted to sit down, just wanted to stop running. So she walked to the table and sat down. Lucas sat across from her at the opposite head. Between them lay meters of polished wood and enough food to feed an entire family. Silence hung heavy for a few seconds. Jordan kept her hands in her lap, fingers intertwined, eyes fixed on the empty plate in front of her. "You don't have to be afraid," Lucas said suddenly, his voice low but firm. "I'm not going to fire you. I'm not angry." Jordan slowly raised her eyes and found him looking at her. There was something different in that gaze. It wasn't the corporate coldness she saw at the office. It was something softer, more human. "Then why am I here?" Jordan asked, her voice still trembling. Lucas took a deep breath and leaned back in his chair, running his hand through his messy hair. "Because I listened to your message," he said simply. "And I understood." Jordan felt her face flush with shame. She lowered her eyes again, biting her lip. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," she murmured. "I didn't mean to—" "Don't apologize," Lucas interrupted her, firm but gentle. "You were honest. That's rare." He stood up and began serving the plates. He took a platter with perfectly roasted turkey slices and placed a generous portion on Jordan's plate, then on his own. Gratin potatoes, colorful roasted vegetables, warm bread with melted butter. He did everything in silence, with precise movements, as if he were used to taking care of himself. When he finished, he sat back down and picked up his fork. "Eat," he said, looking at Jordan. "You need it." Jordan looked at the full plate in front of her. The smell was delicious. Her stomach growled softly, reminding her that she'd barely eaten that day. Carefully, she picked up the fork and knife and cut a small piece of turkey. The first bite was an explosion of flavor. Jordan closed her eyes for a second, feeling the perfect seasoning, the tender texture of the meat, the comforting warmth of real food. It had been so long since she'd eaten anything like this. Lucas watched her as she ate, but not in an invasive way. It was a calm observation, almost protective. "When was the last time you had a real meal?" he asked. Jordan swallowed and hesitated before answering. I don't remember." she admitted quietly. Lucas nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something he already suspected. He took a sip of red wine and then spoke, his voice lower. "I know what it's like to feel invisible." Jordan raised her eyes, surprised. Lucas gave a bitter half-smile. "I know it sounds absurd. The CEO, the heir to the Bennett empire, saying he feels invisible. But it's true." He paused, absently moving his food around. "People see the name, the money, the power, but they don't see me." Jordan said nothing. She just listened. "My father built this company from nothing," Lucas continued, "and he made sure I knew every single day that my only purpose was to continue his legacy, not to be happy, not to be myself, just to be the next Bennett." He looked through the glass window at the snow-covered garden outside. "I got married 3 years ago, to a woman my father approved of. Beautiful, intelligent, from the right family, perfect on paper." His voice grew harder. "She left me 6 months ago, took half of everything and disappeared, said I was cold, distant, emotionless." Jordan felt a tightness in her chest. "Was she right?" she asked quietly. Lucas looked back at her, and for the first time, Jordan saw something breaking in that always controlled face. "Maybe," he admitted. "I don't know anymore. I've spent so long being what everyone expected me to be that I forgot who I actually am." They sat in silence for a few seconds. The only sound was the low crackling of the fireplace in the adjacent room. Then Jordan spoke, her voice soft but firm. "I came to Chicago because I wanted to prove I could make it on my own, that I wasn't just the girl from a small town in Oklahoma who would stay there forever." She looked at her plate, then back at Lucas. "But I've been here 6 months, and I feel more alone than I ever did back home. At least there, people knew my name. Here, I'm just another face in the crowd." Lucas listened with total attention. He didn't interrupt. He didn't judge. He just listened. "Tonight was the first Christmas I've ever spent alone," Jordan continued, and felt her voice begin to tremble again. "And I realized that maybe I made a mistake. Maybe I'm not strong enough for this." "You are," Lucas said suddenly, firmly. Jordan raised her eyes. "You're still here," he said. "That's strength. You didn't give up. You didn't go back. You stayed and fought, even when it hurt." Jordan felt tears rising again, but this time they weren't tears of despair. They were something different. Relief. From being seen. From being heard. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked, her voice choked. Lucas held her gaze. "Because when I heard your voice in that message, I recognized it. The loneliness, the fear, the exhaustion." He paused. "And I didn't want you to spend Christmas the way I was about to spend mine. Alone. Pretending it didn't matter." Jordan wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and gave a small, fragile smile. "Thank you," she whispered. Lucas nodded and raised his wineglass. "To lonely Christmases that don't have to be lonely anymore." Jordan picked up her glass, filled with juice that Lucas had poured when she refused the wine. They toasted, the soft sound of crystal meeting echoing in the silent room. And for the first time that night, Jordan felt that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't so alone after all. They talked for hours, about Oklahoma and Jordan's family ranch, about the pressure of inheriting an empire, about dreams that had been set aside, about fears that had never been spoken aloud. When the night wore on and the clock showed almost 2 in the morning, Lucas stood up and offered to take Jordan back home, but before leaving he stopped at the door and looked at her. "You're not invisible, Jordan," he said, his voice low but intense. "Not to me." And in that moment, something changed. Jordan returned to her tiny, cold apartment, but this time she didn't feel empty. She felt seen. Monday arrived cold and clear. Jordan woke up early in the small apartment, but this time the silence didn't weigh as heavily. She showered, put on the simple white blouse and black pants she wore to work every day, and pulled her hair back in a low bun. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror and saw something different. It wasn't the clothes. It wasn't her face. It was something in her eyes. Hope. When she arrived at Bennett Global, the glass and steel building in Chicago's financial district, Jordan passed through the revolving door and went up to the 12th floor where reception was located. She greeted her co-workers as always, sat down behind the dark granite desk and turned on the computer. Everything seemed normal. But then, around 10 in the morning, the reception phone rang. Jordan answered with her usual professional voice. "Bennett Global, good morning. How can I help you?" The voice on the other end was familiar, firm, controlled. "Miss Wells, this is Lucas Bennett. I need you in the conference room on the 15th floor in 10 minutes. Bring a notebook." Jordan felt her heart race. "Yes, Mr. Bennett," she replied, keeping her voice calm. He hung up. Jordan looked around the reception area. No one seemed to have noticed anything. She grabbed a notebook and pen, straightened her blouse, and went up 3 floors to the conference room. When she entered, there were 5 people around the table. Lucas sitting at the head in an impeccable suit with rigid posture, 2 operations directors, a marketing manager, and an external consultant. Everyone looked at Jordan when she walked in. Lucas didn't look away. "Miss Wells, have a seat," he said, pointing to the empty chair beside him. Jordan obeyed, feeling the other's eyes on her. It was strange being there. Receptionists didn't participate in strategic meetings, but no one questioned Lucas Bennett. The meeting lasted almost 2 hours. They discussed the company's public perception, the client experience, and how Bennett Global was viewed by people entering the building for the first time. And to everyone's surprise, Lucas turned to Jordan several times and asked, "What do you think, Miss Wells? You're the first person clients see when they arrive. What's your impression?" Jordan hesitated at first, but gradually began to speak. She talked about clients who seemed lost, about the coldness of the entrance hall, about how sometimes people felt intimidated before they even reached their meetings. Lucas listened to every word and took notes. When the meeting ended, everyone left, except Jordan. Lucas remained seated, looking at the notes he'd taken. "You're observant," he said without looking up. "Most people here see numbers. You see people." Jordan didn't know what to say. Lucas finally looked at her. "I want you in more meetings like this. Your perspective is valuable." And that's how it began. Over the following weeks, Lucas started discreetly including Jordan in strategic meetings, always with a professional excuse, always maintaining formality at the office, but at night, after everyone had left, he'd send messages. "Have dinner with me tonight." At first, they were dinners at discreet restaurants far from downtown, where no one from the company would recognize them. Lucas chose small, cozy places with corner tables and low lighting. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing, about dreams, about fears, about the weight of carrying expectations that weren't yours. Jordan discovered that Lucas Bennett, the cold and ruthless CEO, laughed when she told funny stories about growing up in the countryside, that he loved black coffee with no sugar, that he had a small scar above his left eyebrow from when he'd fallen off his bike at 7 years old. That deep down, he was just a tired man, trying to figure out who he was beyond the last name. And then one night, Lucas invited her to dinner at the mansion. Jordan arrived nervous, still using the black sedan he sent to pick her up. But this time, when the door opened, it wasn't Lucas who greeted her. It was a little girl. She had enormous blue eyes, light blonde hair pulled into 2 uneven braids, and wore a pink dress with unicorn prints. She must have been about 3 years old, and she looked at Jordan with a mixture of curiosity and shyness. "Hi," Jordan said softly, crouching down to the girl's height. "What's your name?" The little girl clutched the stuffed teddy bear she was holding against her chest and whispered, "Mia." Jordan smiled. "That's a beautiful name. I'm Jordan." Mia tilted her head to the side, still wary. But then Lucas appeared in the hallway, drying his hands on a dish towel. "I see you've met my daughter," he said, and there was something different in his voice, something softer. Jordan stood up, surprised. She hadn't known Lucas had a daughter. He'd never mentioned it. Lucas picked Mia up, and the little girl immediately hid her face in his shoulder. "She's shy with new people," he explained. "Her mother left when she was 2. She hasn't seen her since." Jordan felt her heart squeeze. During dinner, Mia sat in a high chair next to Lucas, eating mac and cheese in silence. She glanced at Jordan from time to time, but looked away whenever she was caught. Jordan didn't push. She just talked naturally with Lucas, laughed at his stories, and occasionally made a silly comment that made Mia let out a muffled giggle. After dinner, while Lucas washed the dishes, Jordan stayed in the living room. Mia was sitting on the carpet, playing with colorful building blocks, but couldn't fit a red piece in the right place. She tried several times, frustrated, until she dropped everything and crossed her little arms. Jordan sat on the floor beside her. "Can I help?" she asked softly. Mia looked at her sideways, hesitant. Then slowly she pushed the red block toward Jordan. Jordan took the piece and pretended to try fitting it in several wrong places, making exaggerated faces. Mia started to laugh, a low, sweet, childish laugh. Then Jordan finally fit the piece in the right spot, and Mia clapped her hands. "You did it!" Jordan said, smiling. Mia smiled back, and for the first time her eyes sparkled. From that night on, Jordan started going to the mansion more frequently. Lucas cooked or tried to, Mia played on the floor, and Jordan felt part of something she'd never imagined, a family. She sat with Mia on the carpet and made up stories about brave princesses and kind dragons. She helped the girl build block castles and then pretended to be a dinosaur knocking them down, making Mia laugh out loud. And gradually, the shy, insecure little girl began to open up. One night, after Mia had gone to sleep, Lucas and Jordan sat on the sofa side by side, looking at the lit fireplace. "She likes you," Lucas said quietly. Jordan smiled. "I like her too." Lucas turned his face toward Jordan. He was so close she could see the small golden flecks in his blue eyes. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse, "for seeing her, for seeing us." And then he kissed her. It was a slow kiss, gentle, full of everything neither of them could say in words. When they pulled apart, Jordan rested her forehead against his and closed her eyes. "I see you, Lucas," she whispered. "I always have." And in that cold mansion of glass and concrete, for the first time in years, Lucas Bennett felt like he had a home. But outside, hidden in the shadows beyond the tall gates, someone was watching and feeling hatred. The following months were the happiest of Jordan's life. She woke up every day with a sense of purpose she'd never felt before. At the office, she continued being the professional, polite receptionist, greeting clients, answering phones, organizing schedules. But now there was something different. There was a secret tucked in her chest that made her smile when no one was watching. Lucas. They were careful. At work, they maintained professional distance. He was still Mr. Bennett, cold and ruthless in meetings, never letting anything show beyond what was expected of a CEO. And she was still Miss Wells, always punctual, always discreet, always invisible to most people's eyes. But at night, when the office lights went out and everyone went home, Jordan's phone would vibrate. "The car is waiting." And she would go. To the mansion in Lakeview Heights, to candlelit dinners at the large wooden table, to nights when Lucas cooked something simple and they ate sitting on the living room floor, laughing at silly jokes while Mia slept upstairs, to entire weekends hidden behind tall gates where the outside world didn't exist and they could just be Lucas, Jordan, and Mia. Jordan fell in love with the routine. She fell in love with waking up on Saturday morning to find Mia jumping on the bed, asking for pancakes. She fell in love with helping the little girl choose clothes and braiding her blonde hair in crooked braids that never turned out perfect. She fell in love with seeing Lucas relaxed, barefoot, in a t-shirt and sweatpants, playing hide-and-seek through the enormous house. She fell in love with being part of a family. But secrets, no matter how well kept, always leave traces, and someone was paying attention. Sabrina Cole was 30 years old, with straight black hair cut to shoulder length, sharp dark eyes, and an ambition that burned like fire. She was a project manager at Bennett Global, a position she'd earned through hard work, sleepless nights, and a relentless determination to climb the corporate ladder. But what Sabrina really wanted wasn't just a position, it was a name. Bennett. She wanted to be Mrs. Bennett. Sabrina had met Lucas years ago, right after his divorce. She'd offered to help him with strategic projects, stayed late at the office, always available, always useful. She flirted discreetly, left invitations hanging in the air, wore fitted dresses to meetings where she knew he'd be present. But Lucas never reciprocated. He was polite, professional, distant. He thanked her for her work, praised her competence, but never crossed the line. And that drove Sabrina crazy, because she knew she was beautiful, intelligent, successful. She came from a good family, knew the right people, spoke 3 languages. She was perfect for him, but he never saw her. And then, suddenly, everything changed. It was a Tuesday morning, 3 months after that Christmas night. Sabrina was at the office early, as always, reviewing reports. She passed by reception on her way to the meeting room and saw Jordan sitting behind the desk, typing something on the computer. Nothing special, just the usual receptionist. But then Sabrina noticed something. Jordan was different. It wasn't the clothes, still the same white blouse and black pants as always. It wasn't her hair, still pulled back in a simple bun. It was something else, something in her face, in her eyes. There was a glow there, a small smile, almost imperceptible, playing at the corners of her mouth as she typed. Jordan was happy. Sabrina frowned. Why would that girl be so happy? What had changed? She didn't think much about it. Not that day. But over the following weeks, Sabrina began to notice more things. She noticed that Lucas had started including Jordan in strategic meetings, that he asked for her opinion on topics that, frankly, weren't within a receptionist's scope, that he looked at her in a way that was different. And then, on a Thursday night, Sabrina saw something that made her blood run cold. She was leaving the office later than usual, carrying a briefcase full of documents. As she passed through the parking garage, she saw Lucas's black sedan still parked there. Strange. He usually left early on Thursdays to pick up Mia from daycare. Sabrina slowed her pace and stayed back, hiding behind a column. The building door opened. Jordan came out, wearing her old grey coat and brown leather boots. She looked around nervously, then walked quickly to the black sedan. The driver opened the back door. Jordan got in, and the car drove out of the parking garage. Sabrina stood there, frozen, feeling something cold and heavy settling in her chest. That was Lucas's ride, his car, going to pick up the receptionist. Why? From that day on, Sabrina began following Jordan. Not obviously, she was too smart for that, but discreetly. Observing, taking notes, connecting the dots. She noticed that Jordan left the office at the same time every day, that the black sedan waited for her on discreet streets, never in front of the building, that Jordan returned home late, sometimes only at dawn. And then, on a cold night in March, Sabrina decided to follow the car. She took her own vehicle and kept her distance, following the sedan's taillights through Chicago's streets. The car headed north, to Lakeview Heights, to the neighborhood where Sabrina knew Lucas lived. The sedan passed through the black iron gate and entered the property. Sabrina parked across the street, hidden behind a tall tree. She waited. 10 minutes, 15, 20, and then she saw it. The mansion's front door opened. Lucas came out wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans. He was smiling, smiling in a way Sabrina had never seen, and then Jordan appeared behind him, laughing at something he'd said. Lucas turned, pulled Jordan by the waist and kissed her. It wasn't a quick, polite, casual kiss. It was a passionate kiss. Deep, the kind that left no doubt. Sabrina felt her nails digging into her palms. She gripped the steering wheel so hard her fingers turned white. So that was it. Lucas Bennett, the man who had never looked at her, the man she'd pursued for years, was dating the receptionist. A poor girl from some forgotten place. A girl who had nothing, no name, no influence, no power. And he chose her. Sabrina sat there watching as Lucas and Jordan entered the house holding hands. The door closed. The lights came on inside, and Sabrina remained sitting in the dark car, feeling something black and poisonous growing inside her chest. Hatred. It wasn't just jealousy, it was something deeper. It was the feeling of having been robbed, of having lost something that was rightfully hers. And Sabrina Cole didn't lose. She started the car and drove home in silence, eyes fixed on the road, mind already working. If Lucas Bennett wanted to choose that insignificant girl, fine. But Sabrina would make sure that choice cost him dearly, very dearly. She was going to destroy Jordan Wells, and she would do it in a way that Lucas could never save her. Sabrina Cole wasn't the type of person who acted on impulse. She was calculating, patient, and knew that destroying someone required more than just anger. It required planning, it required allies, and it required power, and she knew exactly where to find all of that. Richard Bennett. Richard was 63 years old, with grey hair always slicked back with gel, thin-framed glasses, and a gaze that seemed to assess the monetary value of everything around him. He was tall with broad shoulders and wore custom-tailored suits that cost more than Jordan's annual salary. He was the kind of man who entered a room and everyone automatically straightened in their chairs. He had built Bennett Global from scratch, transforming a small consulting firm into a corporate empire worth billions. And he never let anyone forget it, especially Lucas. Richard saw his son as an extension of himself, a piece on the board, the next name in the Bennett lineage. He didn't care about Lucas's happiness. He didn't care what he wanted. What mattered was the family's reputation, the company's strength, and preserving the legacy. And when Richard learned about Lucas's romance with a nameless receptionist, with no influential family, with no money, he was furious. Sabrina knew this. She'd heard the rumors. She'd seen Richard and Lucas arguing in low voices in the executive corridor, doors closed, expressions tense. She'd noticed how Richard looked at Jordan on the rare occasions he saw her in the office, with disdain, with contempt, as if she were dirt on the expensive carpet. And Sabrina decided to use that. On a Friday afternoon, she requested a meeting with Richard Bennett. She said it was about strategic internal security issues. Richard accepted. He always accepted when the subject involved protecting the company. Sabrina entered his office on the 20th floor at exactly 4 in the afternoon. The room was enormous, all lined with dark wood and leather. There was an entire wall of glass overlooking Chicago and a solid mahogany desk where Richard sat, reviewing documents with a gold pen in his hand. He looked up when Sabrina entered. "Miss Cole," he said, his voice firm and controlled. "Have a seat." Sabrina closed the door behind her and walked to the leather chair in front of the desk. She sat with her back straight, hands folded in her lap, the perfect posture of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "Mr. Bennett, thank you for seeing me," she began, her voice calm. "I've brought up a delicate matter, something that directly affects the company's and the family's reputation." Richard put down his pen and leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed. "Continue." Sabrina took a deep breath, as if hesitant, as if this deeply troubled her. "It's about your son, Mr. Bennett, and about Miss Wells. The name made Richard's face harden immediately. What about them? They're romantically involved, Sabrina said, letting the words hang in the air. For months now. He takes her to his house, regularly, and she's starting to influence strategic decisions in the company. Lucas includes her in meetings where she clearly shouldn't be. Richard clenched his fists on the desk. I know, he said, his voice low and dangerous. And I've already made it clear to my son that this connection is unacceptable. Sabrina nodded slowly. I understand your concern, Mr. Bennett, and I share it. Jordan Wells comes from a family with no resources in rural Oklahoma. She has no formal education beyond high school, no connections, no background that justifies the trust Lucas places in her. She's a gold digger, Richard said coldly. She came to Chicago looking for a better life and found a rich, lonely man. It's obvious. Sabrina tilted her head as if agreeing. It could be, but there's something more concerning, sir. She paused, letting the suspense build. What if she's not just a gold digger? What if she's a real threat? Richard frowned. Explain. Sabrina leaned forward, her voice low and conspiratorial. She has access to the office, to the system, to the computers, and Lucas trusts her enough to include her in strategic conversations. If she wanted to, she could easily manipulate information, divert resources, compromise the company's security, and no one would suspect because she's invisible. Sabrina let the words fall like poison. Richard remained silent for a long moment, eyes fixed on Sabrina. Then slowly he spoke. Do you have proof of this? Not yet, Sabrina admitted. But I can get it, if you give me authorization. Richard stood up from his chair and walked to the glass window, hands clasped behind his back. He stood there looking at the city below, thinking. Sabrina waited. She knew she'd planted the seed. Now she just needed to water it. Finally, Richard turned around. What are you proposing? Sabrina took a deep breath, hiding the smile that threatened to appear. Let me investigate discreetly. I can review her system access, check transactions, look for any irregularities. If she's just an innocent girl, we won't find anything. But if there's something, you'll have the evidence needed to get her away from Lucas once and for all. Richard returned to the desk and sat down, fingers drumming on the mahogany. And if you find something, then you'll have full power to act, Sabrina said calmly. Lucas won't be able to defend her, and Miss Wells will be out of his life forever. Richard remained silent for a few more seconds. Then he picked up the phone on the desk and pressed a button. Mrs. Lawson, prepare an appointment letter. Sabrina Cole will be promoted to Senior Internal Audit Manager with authorization to review all security protocols and access, effective immediately. He hung up and looked at Sabrina. You have 3 months. Find something, anything, and I'll make sure Jordan Wells never gets near my son again. Sabrina stood up, extending her hand. I won't disappoint you, Mr. Bennett. Richard shook her hand firmly. I hope not. Because if that girl destroys everything I've built, I'll destroy whoever allowed it to happen. The threat was clear, but Sabrina wasn't afraid. She had exactly what she wanted: power, access, and the Bennett patriarch's blessing to destroy Jordan Wells. When she left the office, Sabrina walked down the long, silent corridor, her heels echoing on the marble floor. She passed by reception and saw Jordan there, answering a phone call, smiling politely. So innocent, so naive, so doomed. Sabrina smiled. Enjoy it while you can, she murmured softly to herself, because your days here are numbered. And then she disappeared into the elevator, already planning every step of the perfect trap she was about to set. A trap from which Jordan Wells would never be able to escape. Sabrina Cole spent the next 2 weeks studying Jordan Wells like a predator studies its prey. She couldn't make mistakes. The trap needed to be perfect, unquestionable, impossible to undo. With her new position as Senior Internal Audit Manager, Sabrina had access to practically everything at Bennett Global: financial systems, computer logs, access records, security cameras, and most importantly, she had Richard Bennett's authorization to do whatever was necessary. She began by observing Jordan's routine. Every day, at exactly 3 in the afternoon, Jordan left reception to get coffee from the ground floor cafeteria. It was a habit. Sabrina had seen it happen dozens of times. Jordan was gone for exactly 15 minutes, time enough to go down, get the coffee, exchange a few words with the attendant, and come back. 15 minutes. That was all Sabrina needed. She also needed a target, something big enough to be devastating, but not so big that it would draw immediate attention. And then she found the perfect opportunity. Bennett Global was finalizing a major infrastructure project in Hong Kong. It was a $50 million contract, and payments to suppliers were processed weekly. One of these payments, scheduled for the last Friday in April, was $10 million to an engineering company called Pacific Bridge Solutions. 10 million. Enough to destroy a life. Sabrina spent 3 days planning every detail. She created a shell company in the Cayman Islands using an offshore law firm that didn't ask questions as long as the payment was made. The company was called Atlas Holdings Limited, and it existed only on paper. No employees, no physical office, just a bank account waiting to receive money. Then Sabrina waited for the right moment. On Thursday, April 25th at 2:50 p.m., Sabrina sat in her new office on the 18th floor. She looked at the clock. 10 minutes. Jordan would leave to get coffee at 3 o'clock sharp. Always at the same time. Always the same routine. Sabrina picked up a tablet, opened the security camera system, and focused on the 12th floor reception area. There was Jordan, sitting behind the desk, typing something on the computer. She wore her usual white blouse, hair pulled back, calm expression. At 2:58, Jordan stood up. She grabbed her small purse, said something to the colleague beside her, and walked toward the elevator. Sabrina smiled. She waited until she was sure Jordan was in the elevator going down. Then she grabbed the special access badge that Richard had given her, a badge that opened any door, any room, any terminal in the company, and left the office. The 12th floor was busy, but no one paid attention to Sabrina. She was senior manager now. She had every right to be there. She walked calmly to reception and stopped beside Jordan's workstation. The computer screen was still on. Jordan had left the session open, a small but common mistake. Most people did it when they were only going to be gone for 15 minutes. Sabrina looked around. Jordan's colleague was on the phone, facing away. No one else was watching. With quick, precise movements, Sabrina leaned over the keyboard and accessed the company's financial system. She knew exactly where to go. She'd studied that system for days. She opened the payment order scheduled for Pacific Bridge Solutions. $10 million. Bank account at HSBC Hong Kong. All ready to be processed Friday morning. Sabrina clicked Edit, and then, with steady fingers, she changed the bank account number. Instead of the Pacific Bridge Solutions account, she entered the Atlas Holdings Limited account number in the Cayman Islands. $10 million. Now directed to a phantom account. Sabrina saved the changes. The system automatically registered the user who had made the modification, Jordan Wells. Terminal 12A. Time 3:02 p.m. Perfect. Sabrina closed the screen, quickly cleared the browsing history, but not the system log, because that was exactly the log she wanted to be found, and stepped away from the desk. 3 minutes later, Jordan returned with a cup of coffee in hand, smiling at her colleague, completely unaware of what had just happened. Sabrina left the floor in silence, returned to her office, and locked the door. Then she opened her personal laptop and began the second part of the plan. She needed a motive. It wasn't enough to just divert the money. She needed to create a plausible reason for Jordan to have done it. something that made sense, something that would make her look guilty in everyone's eyes. Sabrina had investigated Jordan's family in Maple Creek. She'd hired a private investigator who scoured public records, talked to neighbors, collected information, and she'd found something useful. The Wells family ranch had debts. They weren't huge debts. About $50,000 accumulated over years of bad harvests and medical expenses. But they were real debts, documented, and the local bank had sent collection notices. Sabrina took those documents and manipulated them. With the help of a freelance graphic designer who didn't ask questions, she created a fake foreclosure notice. An official document with letterheads, stamps, forged signatures saying that the Wells family property would be auctioned in 60 days if the total debt of $120,000 wasn't paid immediately. $120,000, a number big enough to create desperation, big enough to justify a crime. Sabrina printed the fake document, put it in a folder, and stored it in the locked desk drawer. Now she just had to wait. On Friday morning, April 26th, at 9:15 a.m., the system automatically processed the $10 million transfer. The money left Bennett Global's account and entered the Atlas Holdings Limited account in the Cayman Islands. No one noticed immediately. Large international transfers were common at the company, but 3 hours later, the financial department's phone rang. It was the representative from Pacific Bridge Solutions in Hong Kong, calling furiously. "Where's our payment? The transfer should have been made this morning. Our workers are stopped. We need that money now." The financial director, Stephen Marsh, checked the system. The transfer had been processed. He showed the receipt to the representative. "I don't understand. The money was sent at 9:15 a.m. Chicago time. It should be in your account." "It's not," the representative shouted. "Check the account number, now." Stephen opened the transaction record, and then he saw it. The account number was wrong. It wasn't the Pacific Bridge Solutions account at HSBC Hong Kong. It was another account, in the Cayman Islands, an account he'd never seen before. Stephen felt his blood run cold. "Hold on a moment," he said, quickly hanging up the phone. He opened the complete transaction log. Who had authorized that transfer? Who had changed the data? And there it was. User, Jordan Wells. Terminal, 12A. Date, time, 04:25, 3:02 p.m. Stephen picked up the internal phone and called Richard Bennett's office directly. "Mr. Bennett, we have an emergency. $10 million has been diverted, and the logs point to Jordan Wells." On the other end of the line, Richard Bennett said nothing for 3 full seconds. Then, with a cold, controlled voice, he replied, "Call an emergency meeting, now, and bring all the evidence." Sabrina Cole was in her office when she received Richard's message. "Executive meeting room, 19th floor." Immediately, she closed the laptop, straightened her impeccable black blazer, grabbed the folder with the fake foreclosure notice, and went upstairs. When she entered the room, Richard Bennett sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of contained fury. Stephen Marsh stood beside him, holding a tablet showing the system logs. And then the door opened again. Lucas Bennett walked in. He looked at his father, then at Sabrina, then at Stephen. And something in his face changed. "What's going on?" Richard stood up slowly, eyes fixed on his son. "Sit down, Lucas. We need to talk about Miss Wells." And in that moment, Lucas knew. The trap had been set, and Jordan was right in the center of it. Lucas entered the meeting room with his heart already racing. He knew that look on his father's face. It was the look of a man about to crush someone. And when Richard mentioned Jordan's name, all of Lucas's instincts screamed in alarm. "Sit down," Richard repeated, his voice low and dangerous. Lucas pulled out a chair and sat down, his eyes moving from Richard to Stephen Marsh, and finally to Sabrina Cole, who sat on the other side of the table with a folder in her hands and an expression that was far too serene. "Is someone going to explain what's going on?" Lucas asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Richard nodded to Stephen, who slid the tablet across the table to Lucas. $10 million, Stephen said, his voice tense, destined for Pacific Bridge Solutions in Hong Kong. It was diverted yesterday afternoon to a phantom account in the Cayman Islands. Lucas picked up the tablet and looked at the screen. The transaction record was there, the original payment order, and the modification made at 3:02 p.m. the day before. Then he saw the name. User, Jordan Wells. Lucas felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. "No," he said immediately, pushing the tablet back. "This is wrong. Jordan would never do this. She doesn't even have access to the financial system." "She has access to the reception terminal," Sabrina said calmly, speaking for the first time. "And that terminal has basic permissions to view and, in specific cases, process low-level payment orders. Someone with technical knowledge could easily exploit that loophole." "Jordan barely knows how to use spreadsheets," Lucas exploded, standing up from his chair. "She doesn't have the technical knowledge to do this. She doesn't need to," Sabrina continued, her voice still calm, still controlled. "She just needs someone to instruct her, or enough desperation to try." Lucas clenched his fists. "What are you talking about?" Sabrina opened the folder in front of her and removed a document. She slid it across the table to Lucas. "This came to my attention during the security audit," she said. "A foreclosure notice. Wells family property in Maple Creek, Oklahoma. Total debt of $120,000. Payment deadline 60 days, or the property will be auctioned." Lucas picked up the document with trembling hands. He read the words, the numbers, the official stamps. It looked real, it looked legitimate, but something didn't make sense. "Jordan never mentioned this," he said, his voice lower. "Of course not," Richard said, finally standing up. He walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Because she knew that if you found out you'd offer help, and she wanted more than help, Lucas. She wanted to secure her future." "That's absurd!" Lucas shouted. "Jordan isn't like that. She's not. She's a poor girl from a forgotten small town," Richard interrupted, turning with cold eyes. "She came to Chicago with nothing, got a basic job, and then she found you, a rich man, lonely, vulnerable after the divorce. She saw an opportunity." "No," Lucas said, shaking his head. "It wasn't like that. I sought her out. I brought her to my house. You fell into her trap," Richard said coldly. "And now she's stolen $10 million from our company. Money that should have gone to a legitimate supplier. Money that's now in an offshore account we can't trace." Lucas looked at the document again, at the logs, at Sabrina's impassive face, and then back at his father. "I'm going to talk to her," Lucas said. "I'll find out what really happened." "You're not going to do anything," Richard said, his voice like a blade, "because here's what's going to happen now." He walked back to the table and placed both hands on the mahogany, leaning forward, eyes fixed on Lucas. "You have two options, son. Option 1, you fire Jordan Wells for cause, call the police, sue her criminally, and let justice take its course. Bennett Global issues an official statement, distances itself from the case, and preserves its reputation. You continue as CEO. The company remains intact." Lucas swallowed hard. "And option 2? Richard smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was a predator's smile. "Option 2, you try to defend her. You claim it's all a mistake, that she's innocent, that the evidence is wrong." He paused. "And I go to the press. I'll tell them that the CEO of Bennett Global was romantically involved with a low-level employee who stole $10 million from the company. I'll say you knew about the relationship, that you violated internal policies, that you were possibly complicit in the crime." Lucas felt his blood run cold. "You wouldn't do that." "I would," Richard said without hesitation. And when the media picks up this story, when shareholders demand your head, when the board votes for your removal, you'll lose everything. The position, the company, the family name. And even so, Jordan Wells will be prosecuted anyway, because the evidence exists, and it's irrefutable. Lucas looked at his father, feeling a mixture of anger, pain, and desperation twisting inside him. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you disappointed me," Richard said simply. "I raised you to lead an empire, and you chose to fall in love with a girl who's worth nothing. So now you're going to choose the company and your future, or her." Lucas remained silent. He looked at Sabrina, who sat with her hands folded in her lap, expressing nothing. He looked at Stephen, who looked away, clearly uncomfortable. And he looked back at his father. "I need to talk to her," Lucas said, his voice hoarse, "before I make any decision." Richard nodded slowly. "You have until tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. If she hasn't resigned by then, I'm going to the police and to the press." Lucas left the meeting room like a man in a trance. He went down to the parking garage, got in the car, and drove on autopilot. He didn't go to the mansion. He went straight to Jordan's small apartment on the west side. He knocked on the door at 7 in the evening. Jordan opened with a smile on her face, wearing an old t-shirt and sweatpants, her hair loose on her shoulders. "Lucas," she said, surprised. "I didn't know you were coming today. Did something happen?" She stopped when she saw the expression on his face. "What's wrong?" Jordan asked, the smile disappearing. "What happened?" Lucas entered the apartment and closed the door. He took the tablet from his backpack and showed it to her. The logs, the transaction, her name. Jordan looked at the screen, confused. "I don't understand," she said. "What is this?" $10 million was diverted yesterday," Lucas said, his voice controlled, but she could see the pain in his eyes. "And the records show you did it." Jordan's eyes widened. "What? No, I never—" "I know," Lucas interrupted her. "I know you didn't do this, Jordan, but they have evidence, and they have this." He showed her the foreclosure notice. Jordan took the document with trembling hands. She read it, and then she looked at Lucas, eyes filled with tears. "This is a lie," she whispered. "My family has debts, yes, but not this, not 120,000. And no one ever talked about foreclosure. Someone forged this." "I know," Lucas repeated. "Someone set this up, Jordan. Someone's trying to destroy you." "Who?" Jordan asked, her voice breaking. "I don't know," Lucas lied, because he had his suspicions. Sabrina, his father. But he had no proof. "But listen, Jordan. My father gave me an ultimatum. Either you resign and disappear, or he goes to the police and the press. And if that happens, he'll destroy me too. He'll say I was involved, that I was complicit." Jordan looked at him, eyes wide. "And you're going to let me take the blame?" she asked, her voice thin. "No." Lucas held her shoulders. "No, Jordan, we're going to fight this. I'll hire the best lawyers. I'll prove you're innocent." But Jordan knew. She knew there was no way to fight. The evidence was all against her. The logs, the fake document, the phantom account, and Richard Bennett had enough money, power, and influence to ensure she lost. And if she fought, Lucas would lose everything too. So Jordan made the hardest decision of her life. She stepped away from Lucas, wiped the tears from her face, and took a deep breath. "I don't want this, Lucas," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I don't want to live like this, running, fighting, being hunted. Jordan, don't—" "I'm going to resign," she interrupted him. "And I'm leaving. I'm going back to Oklahoma." "No," Lucas shouted, grabbing her hands. "Don't do this. I love you, Jordan. We'll get through this." Jordan looked at him with tear-filled eyes. "I'm not strong enough for this, Lucas. I'm sorry." And then she lied. "I don't love you enough to risk my life for you." The words came out like stabs, and Lucas felt every one of them. He released her hands, stepping back as if he'd been struck. Jordan turned her face away, unable to look him in the eyes while lying. "Please leave," she whispered. Lucas stood there frozen, looking at her, waiting for her to take it back, waiting for her to say it was a lie. But Jordan remained silent, and then Lucas left. The door closed behind him, and Jordan collapsed on the floor, crying like she'd never cried before, because she had just saved the man she loved by destroying herself. Jordan spent the entire night awake. She sat on the cold floor of the apartment, hugging her own knees, staring at the door Lucas had walked through. Part of her hoped he'd come back, that he'd knock on the door again, that he'd say he didn't accept that lie. But he didn't come back, and Jordan knew it was better that way. When the sun rose on Saturday morning, Jordan got up with her body aching and her eyes swollen. She had no more tears left. There was just an enormous emptiness in her chest, as if someone had ripped out a part of her and left a hole bleeding inside. But she couldn't stop. She couldn't break down. Because if she stayed there, eventually Lucas would come back. Or worse, Richard Bennett would send the police, and then everything she'd sacrificed would be for nothing. Jordan picked up her phone and called Hannah Brooks. The phone rang 3 times before a sleepy voice answered. "Hello?" "Hannah," Jordan said, her voice hoarse. "I need you." Hannah woke up immediately at the sound of her friend's tone. "Jordan, what happened? Are you okay?" "No," Jordan admitted, "but I can't explain now. Can you come to Chicago, please?" There was a pause. Then Hannah said, "I'm getting on the road now. I'll be there in 6 hours." And she hung up. Jordan sent a single email to Bennett Global's Human Resources Department. Subject: Resignation request. Immediate effect. "Dear Sir, Madam, through this email I request my dismissal from the position of receptionist at Bennett Global, effective immediately. I appreciate the opportunity and ask that you process my exit as quickly as possible. Sincerely, Jordan Wells." She hit send and closed the laptop. Then Jordan started packing. She didn't have much. Simple clothes, a few books, family photos, everything fit into 2 old backpacks. She looked around the tiny apartment that had been her home for the past months. The peeling walls, the noisy heater, the fogged window. It all seemed so empty now. Hannah arrived mid-afternoon, driving her old pickup truck. She ran up the stairs and knocked on the door. When Jordan opened it, Hannah pulled her into a tight hug. "What happened?" Hannah asked, holding her friend's face with both hands. "Tell me." Jordan told her everything, about Lucas, about Christmas, about Mia, about the love, and about the trap, about the 10 million. About the cruel lie she'd told to save him. Hannah listened to everything in silence, her face growing more serious. When Jordan finished, Hannah said just one thing: "You need to disappear." And that's exactly what they did. Hannah had a cousin who lived on the west side of Chicago in a simple, forgotten neighborhood, far from the skyscrapers and Bennett Global offices. The cousin had a room available to rent, no contract, no questions asked. Perfect. Jordan sold her laptop and phone at a used electronics store. With the money, she bought a simple prepaid phone with no connection to her previous life, no apps, no social media, no trace. She moved into the rented room on a Monday. It was even smaller than her previous apartment. Just a single bed, an old wardrobe, and a window overlooking a dirty alley. But it was safe, and it was invisible. Jordan spent the first few weeks in a state of silent shock. She didn't eat properly. She didn't sleep properly. She just lay in bed, staring at the cracked ceiling, reliving every moment with Lucas, every kiss, every laugh, every word of love. She thought about Mia, the little girl with big blue eyes who had learned to trust her, who laughed at silly stories, who hugged her before bed. Jordan cried until she had no strength left. And then she cried more. Hannah visited her almost every day, bringing food, trying to make her friend eat, trying to bring some light back to those empty eyes. "You need to eat, Jor." Hannah would say, placing a bowl of soup on the small table beside the bed. But Jordan could barely swallow. 2 weeks later, she finally left the room. She needed money. She needed to survive. So Jordan started looking for work. Simple jobs, invisible ones. She got a job at a laundromat 5 blocks away. Washing clothes, ironing, folding, $10 an hour, cash. It was hard work. Her hands turned red from the hot water. Her back ached from standing all day. But she needed it. She needed the physical pain to forget the emotional pain. At night, Jordan returned to the rented room, took a cold shower because the heater didn't work properly, and collapsed on the bed, exhausted. But then something began to change. A month after disappearing, Jordan started feeling a strange discomfort. Morning nausea, extreme sensitivity to smells, fatigue that didn't go away even after sleeping. At first, she thought it was just stress, depression, grief. But then came the delay. Jordan had always been regular, like clockwork, and now she was 2 weeks late. She tried to ignore it, tried to pretend it wasn't happening, but the nausea got worse, and the fear began to grow. On a Saturday morning, Hannah showed up at the room with a pharmacy bag in hand. "You're taking this test," Hannah said, without beating around the bush. "Now." Jordan looked at the bag, feeling her heart race. "Hannah, I can't be—" "Take the test," Hannah interrupted, firm but gentle. Jordan took the box with trembling hands. She went to the tiny bathroom at the end of the hallway, locked the door, and opened the package. 3 minutes. She needed to wait 3 minutes. Jordan sat on the toilet lid, holding the white plastic test in her hands, staring at the little window where the result would appear. Her heart beat so hard she could hear it in her ears. She counted the seconds, counted her breaths, and then, slowly, 2 pink lines began to appear. 2 lines. Jordan felt the world spin. She looked at the test again, bringing it closer to her face, as if maybe she was seeing wrong, but she wasn't. 2 clear lines. She was pregnant. Jordan covered her mouth with her hand, muffling the sob that threatened to escape. She closed her eyes, feeling tears streaming down her face. Pregnant with Lucas's baby. She returned to the room like a zombie. Hannah immediately stood up when she saw the expression on her friend's face. "Jordan?" Jordan held out the test without saying anything. Hannah looked at the 2 lines. Then she looked back at Jordan and pulled her into a tight hug. "It's okay," Hannah whispered. "We'll figure it out, it's okay." But Jordan didn't know if it was okay. She was pregnant, alone, hiding, without money, without family nearby, and the baby's father thought she had given up on him. Jordan sat on the bed and placed her hand on her still flat belly. "What am I going to do?" she whispered. Hannah sat beside her and held her hand. "You're going to have this baby," Hannah said firmly, "and I'll be here with you, every step of the way." Jordan looked at her friend, eyes filled with tears. "I can't tell Lucas," she said, her voice breaking. "If Richard Bennett finds out, he'll use the baby to control Lucas. Or worse, he'll try to take the baby from me. I can't let that happen." Hannah nodded slowly. "Then we keep it a secret, for now." Jordan took a deep breath and wiped her face. She was pregnant. She was alone. She was scared. But for the first time in weeks, Jordan felt something beyond pain. She felt purpose. She had someone to protect now, someone who depended on her, someone she would love unconditionally. And no one, not Richard Bennett, not Sabrina Cole, not anyone, was going to take that away from her. Jordan placed both hands on her belly and whispered, "I'm going to protect you, no matter what happens. I'm going to protect you." And in that tiny, cold room, with only Hannah by her side, Jordan Wells decided she was going to survive, for herself and for the baby growing inside her. The months that followed were the hardest of Jordan's life. She woke up every day before sunrise, nauseous, exhausted, with her body changing in ways that scared and amazed her at the same time. Her belly started to grow, Small at first, but impossible to hide after the 4th month. Jordan had to quit her job at the laundromat. The owner, an older Italian woman with grey hair, noticed the pregnancy and, with a pitying look, said she couldn't keep her on. Too much heavy work for a pregnant woman. So Jordan started doing odd jobs, cleaning houses paid in cash, dog sitting, handing out flyers on the street. Anything that paid and didn't ask questions. The money was scarce. Sometimes there wasn't even enough to eat properly. But Jordan refused to go back to Oklahoma. If she went back, her family would ask questions, and eventually someone would find out about Lucas, about the baby. And Richard Bennett would have all the power in the world to take the child from her, so she stayed, hidden, invisible, surviving. Prenatal care was done at a community clinic on the far west side of the city. A simple place with peeling walls and hard plastic chairs, but where doctors didn't ask for health insurance and accepted cash payments. Jordan went to appointments alone, or sometimes with Hannah, and listened to the baby's heartbeat beating strong on the cheap ultrasound. "It's a boy," the doctor said on a rainy day in July, smiling as she pointed to the blurry screen. "A boy." Jordan looked at the shaky image and felt tears streaming down her face. A son, hers and Lucas's. She placed her hand on her rounded belly and whispered, "Hi, my love, I'm your mommy." At night, alone in the rented room, Jordan talked to the baby. She told stories about Oklahoma, about the ranch, about the horses. She told him about his father, the strong, good man she had loved and lost. And she promised every night that she would protect him, always. But while Jordan struggled to survive on the other side of town, Lucas Bennett was sinking into a silent darkness. He accepted the official version. Jordan had diverted $10 million. She had resigned. She had disappeared. The evidence was there, irrefutable, and she herself had said she didn't love him enough to fight. But the pain Lucas felt wasn't that of a man betrayed by a thief. It was the pain of someone who had lost the only person who truly saw him. The pain of a man who knew deep down that something was wrong with that whole story, but who didn't have the strength to fight against his own father, against the system, against everything. Lucas started working even longer hours. He arrived at the office at 6 in the morning and left after midnight. He immersed himself in meetings, reports, projects, anything to avoid thinking, to avoid feeling. At home, Mia asked about Jordan. "Where's Jordan, Daddy?" the little girl asked every night, holding her stuffed bear. "She had to go away, sweetheart," Lucas would answer, his voice hoarse. "But she sent kisses for you." Mia accepted the answer at first. But over time, the girl became quieter, more withdrawn. She stopped playing as much, stopped laughing, as if she knew she had lost someone important. And Lucas saw all of it, and hated himself for not being able to do anything. But someone didn't believe the official story. Linda Bennett. Linda was 58 years old, with light blonde hair streaked with grey, soft green eyes, and a warm smile that contrasted completely with her husband's coldness. She had married Richard at 23, in love with an ambitious man who promised great achievements. But over the decades, she had watched that man transform into someone cold, controlling, obsessed with power. Linda loved her son. And she had seen at the single dinner when Jordan was invited to their house months before everything fell apart, something Richard never noticed. She saw love, true love, in Jordan's eyes when she looked at Lucas. Love in the small gestures, in the way she held his hand under the table, in the way she smiled when he made a bad joke. That wasn't the expression of a gold digger. That was the expression of a woman in love. So when the news of the supposed theft came out, and Jordan simply disappeared without fighting, without defending herself, Linda knew. Something was wrong. She waited. She observed. And then, discreetly, she hired a private investigator. Not just any investigator, one of the best in Chicago. A man named Thomas Grayson, former police detective, specialized in corporate fraud and financial crimes. A man who couldn't be bought and who had a reputation for finding the truth, no matter where it was hidden. Linda met him at a discreet cafe downtown 2 weeks after Jordan's disappearance. "I want you to investigate a case of alleged embezzlement at Bennett Global," Linda said, sliding a folder across the table. "But I don't want you to investigate the accused. I want you to investigate who accused her." Thomas opened the folder and read the details. Then he looked at Linda with raised eyebrows. "You're asking me to investigate your own husband?" "I am," Linda said without hesitation, "because I know he's hiding something, and I want to know what." Thomas studied her face for a long moment. Then he nodded. "It'll take time, and it'll be expensive." "I have time, and I have money," Linda said. "Just find the truth." Thomas Grayson started working immediately. He had access to resources most people didn't. Contacts in the police, ethical hackers, financial tracking experts. He started with the Phantom account in the Cayman Islands, Atlas Holdings Limited. It took 3 weeks, but he managed to trace the company's creation. And he discovered something interesting. The company had been registered by an offshore law firm that mainly served clients from the United States, and one of the opening documents had a traceable digital signature, an IP address, from Chicago. Thomas traced the IP and discovered it belonged to a personal computer registered in the name of Sabrina Cole. He kept digging. He analyzed the access logs of Bennett Global's system and found something the internal auditors had overlooked. On April 25th, at 3:02 p.m., when Jordan supposedly altered the payment order, Terminal 12A, her computer, indeed registered the activity. But 2 minutes earlier, at 3 p.m., another terminal also accessed the same financial module. Terminal 18D, Sabrina Cole's computer. Thomas checked the security cameras. Bennett Global had cameras on every floor, including reception. He gained access to the files through an old contact on the IT team, and there it was. At 2:58 p.m., Jordan left reception and entered the elevator. At 3:01 p.m., Sabrina Cole appeared in the hallway, looked around, walked to Jordan's workstation, and leaned over the keyboard. The camera caught everything. Thomas continued investigating. He went to Maple Creek, Oklahoma, and talked to the local bank manager, who supposedly had sent the foreclosure notice. "Foreclosure?" the manager said, confused. "No, sir. The Wells family has debts, yes, about 50,000. But nothing that would justify foreclosure, and we never sent any notice like that." Thomas asked to see the official records. No foreclosure document existed. It was all fake. Thomas returned to Chicago with a folder full of evidence, copies of the IP records, screenshots of the system logs, the security camera video, the bank manager's statement. He delivered everything to Linda Bennett on a cold afternoon in September. Linda read every page, watched the video 3 times, and felt the anger growing inside her like a bonfire. Sabrina and Richard, who had given her authorization to do all of that. Linda waited until evening. Waited until Richard was home, sitting in his office, reviewing documents. Then she entered without knocking, threw the folder on the desk and said, "I know what you did." Richard looked up, surprised. "What are you talking about?" "Sabrina Cole forged the evidence against Jordan Wells," Linda said, her voice trembling with contained fury. "She diverted the money. She created the fake document, and you gave her authorization to do it." Richard remained silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he leaned back in his chair. "Prove it." Linda opened the folder and dumped everything on the desk, the evidence, the videos, the documents. "Here's your proof," she said, "and now you're going to tell Lucas, or I will." Richard looked at the evidence, and for the first time in decades, Linda saw fear in his eyes, because he knew he had lost. The next day, Linda took the evidence to Lucas personally, but first she went to the mansion. She used the key he had given her years ago and entered quietly. The house was dark, with only a faint light coming from the office on the second floor. Linda climbed slowly and found Lucas sitting in the leather chair, his head in his hands, shoulders hunched. "Lucas," she said softly. He looked up, surprised. His eyes were red, as if he'd been crying recently. "Mom," he said, his voice hoarse. "What are you doing here?" Linda entered the office and sat in the armchair beside him. She reached out and held his hand firmly. "I'm here because you're my son, and I'm watching you destroy yourself." Lucas looked away. "I'm fine." "No, you're not," Linda said gently. "You're not eating properly. You're not sleeping properly. Mia is suffering, and you're disappearing bit by bit." Lucas closed his eyes. "I don't know what to do, Mom. I lost her, and it was my fault. I should have fought harder, should have believed in her. But I didn't." Linda squeezed his hand. "Do you believe now?" Lucas opened his eyes and looked at his mother. "Believe in what?" "That she's innocent," Linda said calmly. "That she didn't steal that money, that she was set up." Lucas swallowed hard. "I want to believe. But the evidence—" "What if the evidence was wrong?" Linda interrupted. "What if someone had forged it?" Lucas remained silent. He looked at his mother with a mixture of hope and fear in his eyes. "Why are you saying this?" Linda took a deep breath. "Because I met Jordan, Lucas. I saw how she looked at you, saw how she was with Mia. And that girl wasn't a thief. She was a girl in love and scared." Lucas felt tears coming back. "So what do I do?" Linda held her son's face with both hands, forcing him to look into her eyes. "You let me find out the truth. You trust me as a son, and I'll find out what really happened." Lucas nodded slowly, tears streaming down his face. Linda hugged him, holding him tight against her chest as she used to when he was a child. She felt her son trembling, felt the silent crying he tried to hide. "I'm going to fix this, my love," she whispered. "I promise." And that's exactly what she did. Weeks passed. Thomas worked in silence, digging, investigating, connecting dots, and with each new discovery, he called Linda and reported the progress. First, he traced the phantom account in the Cayman Islands, discovered it had been registered by Sabrina Cole. Then he found the system logs, showing Sabrina had accessed Jordan's computer minutes before the alteration. Then he got the security camera video, and finally, he went to Maple Creek and discovered the foreclosure notice was fake. Each new piece of evidence broke a piece of Linda's heart. Because it meant her husband, the man she'd spent over 30 years with, had done that. Had destroyed an innocent girl just to protect his own distorted vision of what was best for the family. On a cold afternoon in September, Thomas delivered the complete folder to Linda. She read every page alone, sitting in the silent living room of her own house. And when she finished, she cried. Not for Richard, but for Lucas, for Jordan, for everything that had been destroyed by greed and control. Then she dried her tears, picked up the folder, and went to her husband's mansion. Richard was in his office, as always, reviewing documents. Linda entered without knocking and closed the door behind her. "Linda," he said, surprised, "what are you—" She threw the folder on the desk with force. The papers scattered. "I know what you did," Linda said, her voice trembling with rage. Richard looked at the documents, and for the first time in years, Linda saw fear in his eyes. "Can you explain?" she continued, eyes shining. "Can you explain to me how you destroyed an innocent girl's life? How you gave Sabrina Cole the power to forge evidence? How you lied to our son and made him believe the woman he loves is a criminal?" Richard stood up from his chair. "I did what was necessary to protect—" "Protect what?" Linda shouted. "Your ego? Your empire? Your sick obsession with control?" "She wasn't good for him," Richard shouted back. "She was a gold digger. She loved him," Linda interrupted, tears finally falling. "She truly loved him, Richard, and you destroyed that, destroyed our son in the process." Richard remained silent. Linda wiped her face and took a deep breath. "You're going to tell Lucas, or I will, and then you're going to get out of his life, forever." She left the office without waiting for an answer. The next day, Linda went to Lucas's office. She asked the secretary not to interrupt and entered the room, closing the door behind her. Lucas looked up, surprised. "Mom, what?" Linda placed the folder on the desk. "Sit down, my son," she said softly, "and take a deep breath, because what you're about to see is going to hurt, but it's also going to set you free." Lucas sat down slowly, his heart already racing. He opened the folder and started reading. The documents about the phantom account, the system logs, the video of Sabrina messing with Jordan's computer, the bank manager's statement in Oklahoma saying the foreclosure notice was fake. Lucas read everything in silence, and with each page he felt his chest tighten more. When he finished, he looked up at his mother, and Linda saw absolute pain stamped on that face. "She was innocent," Lucas whispered, his voice broken. "The whole time, and I let her go. I believed the lies. He couldn't continue. Lucas covered his face with his hands and broke down in deep, desperate sobs. Linda ran to his side and hugged him tight, letting her son cry in her arms like he hadn't done since he was a child. "I'm so sorry, my love," she whispered, running her hand through his hair. "I'm sorry for what your father did. I'm sorry you went through this." "Where is she, Mom?" Lucas asked between sobs. "I need to find her, need to ask for forgiveness, need to—" "Thomas is looking," Linda said gently, "and he'll find her. I promise." Lucas pulled away and wiped his face with trembling hands. "And what about Sabrina and my father?" Linda held her son's face with both hands, looking deep into his eyes. "You take care of Sabrina. Fire her. Sue her if you want. Do what you think needs to be done." She took a deep breath. "Your father, I'll take care of him." Lucas nodded slowly. Linda hugged him once more, holding him tight. "You're going to find her, Lucas, and when you do, you'll have the chance to fix everything. I believe in you." Lucas closed his eyes and clung to his mother, feeling for the first time in months that maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. That afternoon, Lucas summoned Sabrina Cole to his office. When she entered, smiling confidently, Lucas simply slid the security camera video across the desk. "You have 1 hour to clear your desk and leave the building," he said, his voice cold. "If you try to sue the company, I'm going to the police with evidence of fraud, document forgery, and embezzlement. You'll go to prison." Sabrina's smile died. She looked at the video, then back at Lucas, and saw in his eyes that there was no negotiation. She grabbed her purse and ran out, her heels echoing down the hallway. As for Richard Bennett, Lucas went to his father's house that same night. Richard opened the door expecting an argument. Expecting to be able to argue, manipulate, control, as he always did. But Lucas just looked at him and said, "You're off the board, out of the company, and out of my life. I don't want you near me. I don't want you near Mia. And when I find Jordan, I don't want you within 100 meters of her. Understood?" Richard opened his mouth to respond, but Lucas turned and walked away, leaving his father alone at the door. And for the first time in his life, Richard Bennett had nothing to say. Now Lucas had only one mission: find Jordan and beg for her forgiveness. Thomas Grayson took almost a month to find Jordan's trail. She had disappeared completely. No registered cell phone, no active bank account, no official address. It was as if she had vanished off the map. But Thomas was good at what he did, and he knew everyone left traces, even when they tried not to. He started with hospitals and clinics in the West Chicago area. He searched for prenatal records paid in cash. He looked for similar names, variations, anything that could give him a clue. And then, at a community clinic in West Garfield Park, he found it. A simple record, just a first name and last initial, Jordan W., estimated due date, late September, cash payments, no insurance. Thomas managed, through contacts, to check the address that had been provided on the form. An old 3-story building on a quiet side street, apartment 203. He called Lucas immediately. It was a cold October morning. Lucas was at the office, trying to concentrate on reports, but his mind was far away. He thought about Jordan every day, every night. He dreamed about her. He woke up with his heart aching, wondering where she was, if she was okay, if he'd ever find her again. When his phone rang and he saw Thomas's name on the screen, his heart raced. "Did you find her?" Lucas asked before Thomas could even speak. "I found her," Thomas said on the other end. "West Garfield Park, 847 Maple Street, apartment 203. Lucas hung up the phone, grabbed his coat, and ran out of the office. He didn't even tell his secretary. He didn't take the car with the driver. He got into his own car and drove like a madman through Chicago's streets. West Garfield Park was a neighborhood Lucas had never set foot in before. Narrow streets, old buildings, rusty cars parked on the sidewalks. It wasn't dangerous, but it was poor. Very different from Lakeview Heights. Lucas parked in front of number 847 and looked up. The building was made of faded red brick, with small windows and an external iron staircase that creaked in the wind. He got out of the car and climbed the steps 2 at a time, his heart beating so hard it hurt. First floor, second floor, and there, at the end of the narrow dark hallway, was the door marked with the number 203. Lucas stopped in front of the door, his hand suspended in the air, ready to knock. But then he heard it. Crying. A baby crying. Lucas felt the world stop. He stood there, frozen, listening to that thin, high-pitched sound coming from inside the apartment. A baby. There was a baby in there. With his hand trembling, Lucas knocked on the door. The crying stopped for a second, as if whoever was holding the child had been startled. Then he heard footsteps. Light, hesitant. The door opened, and there she was. Jordan. Lucas felt the air leave his lungs. She was thin, very thin. Her brown hair was longer, falling disheveled over her shoulders. Her face was pale, with deep dark circles under her eyes. She wore an old loose t-shirt and worn sweatpants, and in her arms, wrapped in a faded blanket, was a tiny baby. Jordan looked at Lucas as if she were seeing a ghost. Her eyes widened. Her mouth opened in a silent gasp. And then Lucas saw the fear. Pure fear stamped in those brown eyes he loved so much. "Lucas," she whispered, her voice hoarse, almost inaudible. Lucas couldn't speak. He just looked at her, at the baby in her arms, at the tiny, miserable apartment behind her, and he felt something break inside his chest. "Can I come in?" he finally managed to say, his voice coming out trembling. Jordan hesitated. Her eyes went from the door to Lucas, then to the baby, and back to Lucas. She was calculating, thinking, deciding if she could trust him. Then slowly, she took a step back and opened the door. Lucas entered the apartment, and the door closed behind him. The place was tiny. It couldn't have been more than 200 square feet. A single bed against the wall, an improvised wooden crib beside it, made from crates and a thin cushion. An old table with 2 broken chairs, a small sink in the corner, a tiny window overlooking a dark alley. That was it. That was where Jordan was living. Lucas felt tears rising, but he tried to hold them back. Jordan walked to the bed and sat on the edge, still holding the baby carefully. The little boy had stopped crying and now looked at Lucas with big, curious eyes. He must have been a few days old, maybe a week, 2 at most. Lucas approached slowly, as if afraid of scaring her. He knelt on the floor in front of her, getting at eye level with Jordan. "Jordan," he said, his voice breaking, "I know the truth." Jordan looked away. "I know you didn't steal that money," Lucas continued. "I know it was Sabrina. I know my father gave her authorization to do it. I know the foreclosure notice was fake. I know everything." Jordan closed her eyes, tears silently streaming down her face. "And I know you lied to me," Lucas said, his voice lower now. "When you said you didn't love me enough, you lied to save me, to protect me." Jordan opened her eyes and finally looked at him. And Lucas saw everything in those eyes: the pain, the sacrifice, the love that had never died. "I'm so sorry," Lucas said, tears finally falling. "I'm sorry I didn't believe in you, for letting you go, for not fighting hard enough, for everything." Jordan shook her head, her voice coming out in a hoarse whisper. "It wasn't your fault. They set everything up perfectly. There was no way you could have known." "But I should have trusted you," Lucas insisted. "I should have known you well enough to know you'd never do that." They remained silent for a long moment. The only sound was the baby's soft breathing in Jordan's arms. Then Lucas looked at the child, and something in his chest tightened. "Is he mine?" Lucas asked, his voice barely coming out. Jordan held the baby closer to her chest, instinctively protective. She looked at Lucas with fear-filled eyes. "Please don't take him from me," she whispered, her voice desperate. "Please, Lucas, I know you have money, power, lawyers. I know I could lose everything, but please don't take my son." Lucas felt his heart shatter. "Jordan," he said, slowly reaching out and touching her face gently, "I would never do that. Never." Jordan sobbed, tears falling faster now. "He's yours," she admitted. "He was born 4 days ago. I gave birth here, in this room, with Hannah helping me. I didn't have money to go to the hospital." Lucas felt the pain explode inside him. She had gone through all of that alone. The pregnancy, the birth, everything. While he was in the mansion, drowning in self-pity. "What did you name him?" Lucas asked, his voice choked. Jordan looked at the baby in her arms and smiled through her tears. It was a small, fragile smile, but full of love. "Vita," she said softly. "Vita Bennett." Lucas closed his eyes, letting the tears fall freely now. He had a son he didn't even know existed, a son who had been born in poverty, in suffering, while he was far away. "Can I hold him?" Lucas asked, his voice trembling. Jordan hesitated for just a second. Then slowly she extended the baby to Lucas. Lucas took the little boy carefully, as if he were holding the most precious thing in the world. And in fact, he was. Vita was so small, so light, wrapped in the worn blanket. He had tufts of dark brown hair, pink skin, little blue eyes looking at Lucas with curiosity. And Lucas saw himself in that little face, saw Jordan, saw everything they could have been and still could be. He held his son against his chest and cried. He cried for everything Jordan had gone through. He cried for the pain, the loneliness, the sacrifice. He cried for the lost time. And he cried with gratitude for having found her, for still having a chance. Jordan watched Lucas holding Vita, and something inside her began to heal. She had been so afraid that Lucas would come with lawyers, afraid he would try to take the baby from her, afraid of losing the only thing she still had. But looking at him now, seeing the tears streaming down his face as he held their son, Jordan knew he still loved her. Lucas looked up, still holding Vita carefully. "Come home with me," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You and Vita, please. It doesn't have to be forever if you don't want, but at least let me take care of you both. Let me fix this." Jordan looked around the miserable apartment, looked at the narrow bed, at the improvised crib, at the window that let in the cold. Then she looked back at Lucas, at the man she had loved, still loved. "Sabrina and your father—" "Sabrina's been fired," Lucas interrupted. "My father is out of my life, forever. They'll never get near you again, I promise." Jordan closed her eyes, feeling the weight of months of struggle, of fear, of loneliness finally beginning to lift. "And Mia?" she asked softly. Lucas smiled through his tears. "She asks about you every day, every single day, Jordan. She loves you, misses you." Jordan opened her eyes, tears streaming again. "I miss her too." Lucas extended his free hand, still holding Vita with the other. Then come home, to us. Jordan looked at his hand, at their son in his arms, and then, slowly, she placed her hand in his. Lucas pulled her close, wrapping her and Vita in a tight hug, the three of them together, a family. I love you, Lucas whispered in her ear. I always have. I never stopped. I love you too, Jordan whispered back, finally allowing herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they really could have a happy ending. And in that tiny, cold, miserable apartment, with a 4-day-old baby in their arms, Lucas and Jordan chose each other again, this time forever, 2 years later. The modern mansion of glass, concrete and wood in Lakeview Heights was no longer the cold, silent place it used to be. Now there was life. There was noise. There was love. It was a sunny autumn Saturday. The leaves on the trees around the property had started changing color, painting the garden with shades of gold, orange, and red. The sky was clear blue, and a gentle, fresh breeze blew, bringing the smell of wet earth and dry leaves. In the backyard, the grass was covered with toys, colorful building blocks, a red tricycle tipped on its side, a soccer ball, and in the middle of it all, running barefoot in a flowing yellow dress, was Mia. She was almost 5 years old now. Her blonde hair was longer, pulled into 2 braids that bounced as she ran. Her blue eyes sparkled with joy, and she laughed, a loud, sweet, free laugh. "Come on, Vitor, run!" she shouted, looking back. Behind her, wobbling with clumsy but determined steps, came a little 2-year-old boy. Vitor had messy dark brown hair, blue eyes inherited from his father, and a huge smile on his chubby face. He wore a t-shirt with a dinosaur print and short jeans, and ran after his older sister with all the strength of his short legs. "Mia, wait!" he shouted, his pronunciation still imprecise, but full of determination. Further back, pretending she couldn't catch up with them, was Linda Bennett. Linda was 60 now, but looked younger. Her blonde grey hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail. She wore a comfortable blouse and jeans, and her face was flushed from the exercise of running after her grandchildren. "You're too fast for Grandma," she pretended to complain, extending her arms. "How is Grandma going to catch you?" Mia stopped running and looked back, laughing. "Grandma's slow," she teased, then ran off again. Linda pretended to be indignant and ran after her, making Mia scream with delight. Vita tried to keep up, stumbled over his own leg, and fell sitting on the grass. For a second his little face scrunched up as if he were going to cry. But then he looked at his dirty hands, gave a little laugh, and got up by himself, brushing off his pants. On the wide wooden deck overlooking the garden, Jordan watched it all with a smile on her face. She was different now. Her brown hair was cut to shoulder length, shiny and healthy. Her face had gained color. The dark circles had disappeared, and there was a glow in her eyes that hadn't existed 2 years ago. She wore a light blue cotton dress, and one hand rested on her slightly rounded belly, 4 months pregnant. Jordan still couldn't believe it. After everything she'd been through, after the pain, the suffering, the loneliness, she was there, in the mansion that had become her home, with the family that had become hers, and expecting another baby. She felt a pair of arms wrapping around her from behind, and a warm body pressing against her back. Lucas rested his chin on her shoulder, his hands finding hers on her belly. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly, his voice hoarse and gentle at the same time. Jordan leaned back, resting against him. "I'm thinking about how life changes," she said, watching Mia and Vita playing with Linda in the garden. 2 years ago, I was alone in a tiny room, afraid of everything. And now," she didn't need to finish. Lucas tightened his embrace, kissing her neck tenderly. "Now you have all of this," he completed, "and you'll have more, always more." Jordan turned her face and kissed him softly on the lips. It was a calm, peaceful kiss, full of accumulated love and kept promises. When they pulled apart, Jordan looked at the garden again and sighed contentedly. "Mia is so happy," she said. "She's not that scared, quiet little girl anymore." Lucas smiled, watching his older daughter laughing loudly as Linda picked her up and pretended to be a monster. "It was you," he said. "You brought her back. You brought light to this house." "We brought it," Jordan corrected, turning in his arms to face him. "You, me, Vita, all of us." Lucas looked at her with those blue eyes that Jordan had learned to read so well. There was love there, gratitude, and something else, something that looked like peace. "I almost lost you," he said, his voice becoming more serious. "I almost lost everything because of my father's greed, because of my own weakness. But you didn't lose me," Jordan said, placing her hand on his face. "I'm here. We're here." Lucas closed his eyes and rested his forehead against hers. "I don't deserve you." "Yes, you do," Jordan whispered. "You deserve it because you chose to fight, because you didn't give up, because you found me." They stayed like that for a long moment, embraced on the deck, listening to the children's laughter and feeling the autumn sun's warmth on their skin. Then Vitor ran to the deck, his short legs climbing the wooden steps with difficulty. He stopped in front of his parents, arms outstretched, his little face sweaty. "Mommy! Daddy! Play!" he asked, bouncing in place. Jordan crouched down carefully, picking the little boy up. Vita immediately wrapped his little arms around her neck and planted a wet kiss on her cheek. "You're all dirty, my love," Jordan laughed, wiping the dirt from his face. "I fell," Vita announced proudly, showing his dirty hands. "I saw," Jordan said, kissing his forehead. "But you got up by yourself. You were very brave." Vitor smiled, all proud, and then looked at Lucas. "Daddy, play!" Lucas picked up his son and tossed him lightly in the air, making Vitor scream with delight. Then he put him on his shoulders, holding his little feet firmly. "Hold on tight," Lucas said, and started running through the garden. Vitor shouted with happiness, his little hands clutching his father's hair, while Lucas pretended to be a galloping horse. Mia saw them and ran after, shouting, "Me too! Daddy, me too!" Further back, pretending she couldn't catch up, was Linda. "He'll get tired before they do," Linda commented, climbing the steps and sitting next to Jordan in the rocking chair. "Definitely," Jordan agreed, smiling. Linda looked at her daughter-in-law with affection. She had fought so hard to bring Jordan back into her son's life. And now, seeing the happiness stamped on Lucas's face, seeing the grandchildren playing, seeing the family finally complete, she knew it had been worth it. "How are you feeling?" Linda asked, discreetly pointing to Jordan's belly. "Good," Jordan said, running her hand over her womb. "Tired sometimes, but good." "Boy or girl?" "We don't know yet," Jordan smiled. "We want it to be a surprise." "Mia wants a little sister," Linda commented. "She already told me." "And Vita wants a pet dinosaur," Jordan laughed. "So we'll see what happens." The two women laughed together, watching Lucas finally collapse on the grass, surrounded by the two children jumping on him, tickling him. "Jordan," Linda said after a moment, her voice more serious. "Thank you." Jordan turned, surprised. "For what?" "For forgiving," Linda said, eyes glistening. "For giving my son a second chance, for bringing joy back to this house, for giving me wonderful grandchildren, for everything." Jordan felt tears rising. She held Linda's hand and squeezed it tenderly. "You gave me the truth when no one else believed in me," Jordan said. "You fought for me when I didn't even know I needed someone fighting. I'm the one who thanks you." Linda pulled Jordan into a tight hug, and the two stayed like that for a long moment, mother and daughter-in-law, united by love and gratitude. When they pulled apart, Lucas was climbing the deck with Mia on his shoulders and Vita clinging to his leg, laughing. "Surrender!" Lucas announced, panting. "You won!" Mia raised her arms in celebration. "We won!" Lucas put Mia down and picked Vita up again. The little boy yawned, resting his head on his father's shoulder, already sleepy after all the running around. "I think someone needs a nap," Lucas said, kissing the top of his son's head. Jordan stood up and extended her arms. Lucas handed Vita to her, and Jordan cradled him against her chest, feeling the pleasant weight of her son in her arms. "Come on, my love," she whispered. "Nap time." Vita mumbled something incomprehensible, his little eyes already closing, and Jordan entered the house to put him in his crib. Lucas stayed on the deck with Mia and Linda. The little girl sat in her father's lap, resting her head on his chest. "Daddy," she said softly, "are you happy?" Lucas looked at his daughter, surprised by the question. "Very happy, princess." "Why?" Mia shrugged. "Because before you were sad, and now you smile." Lucas felt his heart squeeze. He hugged his daughter tight and kissed the top of her blonde head. "It's because now we have everything we need," he said. "You, me, Jordan, Vita, Grandma, and the baby coming." Mia smiled. "I like our family." "Me too," Lucas said. "More than anything in the world." Linda watched the two with a smile full of love. Later that night, after the children were already asleep, after Linda had gone home, after the house had quieted down, Lucas and Jordan lay in the huge bed in the master bedroom. The window was open, letting in the cool night breeze. Outside, the trees swayed gently, and the sky was full of stars. Jordan was nestled against Lucas's chest, his hand resting on her belly, feeling the slight rounding there. "Do you remember that Christmas night?" Jordan asked softly. "I remember," Lucas said. "Every day. I was so alone," Jordan continued. "So lost, and I recorded that audio crying, hoping my friend would hear me. And you sent it to me by mistake," Lucas completed, smiling in the dark. "Worst mistake of my life," Jordan joked. "Or best." "Best," Lucas said without hesitation. "Definitely best." Jordan turned in his arms to face him, their faces so close she could feel his breath. "You saved my life that night," she whispered. "No," Lucas corrected, running his hand over her face tenderly. "You saved mine." They kissed slowly, a kiss full of everything they had lived through together. The pain, the separation, the reconciliation, the love that had survived everything. When they pulled apart, Jordan rested her forehead against his and smiled. "We made it," she said. "Despite everything, we made it." "We made it," Lucas agreed. "And we'll keep making it, always." And in that mansion that had been cold and empty, but was now filled with love, laughter, and life, Lucas and Jordan fell asleep, embraced. 2 years ago, Jordan had sent a desperate audio to the wrong number, and that mistake had turned into the most unlikely, most painful, and most beautiful love story either of them could have imagined. A story of a humble girl from Oklahoma and a powerful CEO from Chicago. A story of loneliness transformed into family. A story of sacrifice, truth, and a love that had been tested to its limit and had won. Because sometimes the scariest mistakes turn into the most perfect outcomes. And sometimes all someone needs is to be seen. And so, in that mansion that once echoed only silence, now resounded with children's laughter, whispered promises, and the sound of a family that had been shattered and rebuilt. Jordan had started with an audio sent by mistake on a lonely Christmas night. Not knowing that error would change everything, she had walked through darkness, abandonment, the pain of protecting alone the life growing inside her. And Lucas had learned that power and money could never buy what really matters. Being seen, being loved, being chosen, not for the name you carry but for who you truly are. Sometimes the scariest mistakes lead us exactly where we need to be. Sometimes the person who seems lost is the only one capable of finding us. And maybe deep down, we're all a bit like Jordan and Lucas, just looking for someone who truly sees us, even when we're broken. And you? Have you ever felt like no one saw you? That you were invisible in the crowd? If this story touched your heart, leave your like so we can keep bringing stories that move and transform. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any narrative like this one. And in the comments, tell me, where are you listening to this message from right now? And more. Do you prefer longer, more detailed stories like this, or faster, more direct stories? Your opinion is what guides us. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Until the next story.